Imagine sitting at a family dinner, surrounded by the very people you've sacrificed for, and your own mother looks straight at you and calls you a failure. That happened to me. What no one at that table knew was that I had secretly paid $62,000 to keep their home from foreclosure. Stay with me, because I want to share how that night changed everything between me and my family. My name is Remy. I'm in my late 20s, and I've always been the quiet, hardworking type. I don't chase shiny cars or expensive clothes. I keep to myself, live in a small apartment, and work long hours as an accountant. Nothing glamorous. But I've carried more weight on my shoulders than my family will ever admit. That night, the whole family was gathered around the dinner table at our home in suburban Ohio. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air, but the atmosphere was heavy. My mom, Helena, sat at the head of the table like she always did, acting like the queen of the house. On one side was Carter, my older brother. He's 32, loud, flashy, and irresponsible. He talks big about his business ventures, but I know most of them are funded with credit cards and borrowed money. On the other side sat Elise, my younger sister. She's 25, pampered, and doesn't really work. She calls herself an influencer, but it's more posting selfies than building a career. We were halfway through dinner when it began. Helena leaned forward, her voice sharp but casual, and said, "Remy, I just don't understand you. Look at Carter, he's building a business. Look at Elise, she's making her own brand. And you? You're nearly 30, single, living in some tiny apartment, driving that old car. Honestly, you're such a failure." Her words stung, not because they were new, but because they were spoken in front of everyone, like a performance. Carter smirked, tapping his expensive watch against his glass. Elise giggled behind her hand and rolled her eyes at me like I was the family embarrassment. I sat there quietly, my fork paused halfway to my mouth. My chest tightened, and my face grew warm. I wanted to snap back, to shout that none of them would even be sitting in that house if it weren't for me. But I stayed silent. My mother had begged me 2 years ago to help her keep the home when the bank was threatening foreclosure. I had worked double shifts, drained my savings, and poured $62,000 into saving the roof over their heads. And she swore me to secrecy. Now, here she was calling me worthless, acting as though I'd never done a thing for this family. I clenched my jaw and forced myself to swallow the lump in my throat. They had no idea. Not Carter with his show-off lifestyle. Not Elise with her pampered routines. Not even Helena, who pretended she'd managed everything on her own. I sat in silence, but inside, something was breaking. I wasn't sure how much longer I could carry their insults while hiding the truth. Growing up, I learned quickly that love in my house wasn't given equally. My mom, Helena, had always made it clear who her favorite was, Carter, the golden boy. From the moment he could walk, she bragged about him. When he scored 2 points in a little league game, she clapped like he'd won a championship. When he scraped through high school, she framed his report cards like trophies. To her, Carter could do no wrong. Me? I was just there. Quiet, bookish, steady. If I came home with straight A's, she barely looked up from whatever she was doing. She'd just nod and say, "Well, that's expected of you." No celebration, no pride. I learned to stop bringing my papers to her. Annalise, my little sister, was the princess. Mom always said a woman's best chance in life was marrying well, and she shaped Elise into that mold. Dresses, makeup, charm classes, encouragement to date boys with money. Elise didn't even need to try. Just smile pretty and wait for someone else to hand her the world. And Mom adored her for it. I, on the other hand, wanted independence. I got a job, studied accounting, and worked hard. But in my family's eyes, numbers were dull. My mom laughed once when someone asked what I did for a living. "Oh, nothing exciting. She just crunches numbers all day." My siblings picked up on that tone too. "So boring," Elise would sigh. "You could never do what I do, it takes personality." Carter would snicker and ask if I was still pushing papers for pennies. I moved out as soon as I could, renting a modest apartment just to breathe without the constant comparisons. It was lonely, sure, but at least the walls didn't mock me. Back at that dinner table years later, nothing had changed. Helena leaned toward Carter with shining eyes as he rambled about his new business. In reality, I knew it was another scheme, held together by credit cards and wishful thinking. Still, she hung on every word, praising his ambition, like he was a genius entrepreneur. Then it was Elise's turn. She spoke about a modeling gig she landed. What she didn't say was that it was part-time promo work, passing out samples at events while posing for selfies. But Mom acted like she'd just been signed to a major agency. My beautiful girl, she cooed. You're going to be such a star. I sat quietly, cutting my food, hoping maybe, just maybe, I could get through the evening without being dragged into it. But it never works that way in my family. Carter turned to me with a smirk. So, Remy's still renting that little place? Haven't upgraded yet. Elise jumped in before I could answer. And still driving that old car? Seriously, Remy, you're not tired of being average? Mom gave me that disappointed look I'd seen all my life. Your brother and sister are building real futures, Remy. Why are you still so stuck? The words pressed down like weights on my chest. I wanted to remind them that stability is its own kind of success, that my paycheck actually kept me afloat while they played at life. But I knew better. No matter what I said, in their eyes, Carter was brilliant, Elise was beautiful, and I was just boring old Remy. I bit my tongue and forced a smile. But inside, the sting of being overlooked all my life was burning hotter than ever. 2 years ago, my phone rang late at night. It was my mom, her voice trembling in a way I had never heard before. She didn't sound like the strong, sharp Helena who always commanded the room. Instead, she sounded small. She told me the house was going into foreclosure. The mortgage was months behind, the property taxes unpaid, and the bank had already sent letters. I remember sitting in my tiny apartment, clutching the phone, stunned into silence. Then came the begging. Remy, please. You're the responsible one. Carter's trying to get his business off the ground. Elise is just starting out. They can't handle this. You're the only one I can count on. If the house goes, we lose everything. Don't let us end up on the street. Against every instinct, I agreed. I didn't have money lying around. I had some savings I'd built up over years of skipping vacations, buying secondhand furniture, and saying no to nights out with friends. That first time, I drained nearly all of it to cover the mortgage payments the bank demanded. I thought it would end there, but it didn't. The bills kept coming. Every few months, there was another emergency, property taxes overdue, penalties, late fees. Carter never chipped in, not once. He had already maxed out his credit cards, chasing one failed venture after another. Elise, when asked, shrugged and said she didn't have spare money, because she needed to invest in her image for her career. So it all fell on me. I started working overtime at my accounting firm. Long nights under buzzing fluorescent lights, eyes aching from staring at spreadsheets. I picked up side work, helping small businesses balance their books on weekends. There were weeks I barely slept more than a few hours a night. Every extra dollar I earned went straight to keeping that roof over my family's heads. Over 2 years, the total added up to $62,000. $62,000 I could have put toward buying my own home, building a future, maybe even giving myself a little comfort. Instead, I poured it all into a house where I was barely welcome, all because my mom asked me to. But she didn't just ask for the money. She made me promise to keep it secret. No one can know you helped, she said firmly. We don't need pity. This family will look weak if people find out. Just do it quietly, Remy. That's what's best. And I agreed, because part of me still wanted her approval, even if it came in whispers instead of praise. Now here we were, sitting at that dinner table. My siblings were bragging, my mother was smiling at their shallow successes, and I was once again the butt of the joke. Helena sat tall and proud, pretending she had kept everything afloat through her own strength. She laughed, called me a failure, and compared me to Carter and Elise as though they were soaring and I was crawling. I clenched my hands under the table, nails digging into my palms, but I kept my face calm. They didn't know that every bite of food they ate was made possible because of me. They didn't know that the roof over their heads existed because of my sacrifice. And worst of all, Helena, who had cried into the phone, who had sworn she couldn't survive without me, now acted like I was nothing. It wasn't just the insult that burned. It was the betrayal. Carter leaned back in his chair, the grin on his face wide as he stretched out his arm, so everyone could see the new watch glinting under the dining room light. The gold caught every eye in the room, and he made sure of it, angling his wrist like he was showing off a trophy. Picked this up last week, he said proudly, tapping the face with his finger. Limited edition. Costs more than some people's cars. Helena's eyes lit up, and she clapped her hands together as though her son had just brought home a great achievement. Oh, Carter, you've always had such fine taste. That's class. That's what success looks like. I stared at the watch, knowing full well it wasn't success that had bought it. It was Helena's money. She had emptied part of her savings account to bail him out after one of his credit card companies started calling, and I knew she had slipped him extra cash to get back on his feet. Now here he was, parading the result as if he had earned it himself. Then Elise turned her gaze to me. She let her eyes linger on the blouse I was wearing, a plain blue cotton top I'd picked up on sale months ago. She chuckled, covering her mouth with her hand in a mock attempt to hide it. Remy, seriously? That blouse again? It looks like something out of a clearance bin. Don't you ever treat yourself to something nicer? I swallowed hard, refusing to look away. Elise didn't know what it meant to budget, to plan, to sacrifice. She'd never skipped a meal to pay a bill. Yet here she was, dressed in a new outfit that Mom had probably paid for, mocking me for the one I'd bought with my own hard-earned money. Helena must have sensed the moment was right to strike, because she leaned forward, her voice carrying that sharp, cutting edge she reserved only for me. Remy, you're such a failure, she said matter-of-factly, like she was stating a fact no one could dispute. Look at your siblings. Carter's building a business. Elise is making a name for herself. And you? You're just existing. The words hung in the air for a second, sharp and heavy, before the room erupted. Carter laughed loudly, slapping his hand against the table. Elise tilted her head back, giggling as though it was the funniest thing she had ever heard. Even Helena smirked at her own cruelty, satisfied with the reaction she'd sparked. Their laughter filled the room, bouncing off the walls, louder and louder. Each sound dug into me, mocking everything I had endured, everything I had sacrificed. I felt my fork freeze halfway to my mouth, the food forgotten. My hand shook just slightly, though no one noticed. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, louder than their laughter, until it drowned everything else out. I lifted my eyes slowly, letting them land on Helena. For once, I didn't look down. I didn't stay quiet, and I didn't force a polite smile. I just stared at her, steady and calm. It was an expression she had never seen on me before, an expression that carried every ounce of rage I had buried for years. She must have felt it, because for a split second, her smirk faltered. She looked back at me, and something in her eyes flickered with unease, though she tried to hide it. Inside me, the storm was building. I had spent years swallowing their words, carrying their burdens, and letting them believe I was nothing. But as I stared across the table at the woman who called me a failure in front of everyone, I felt something shift. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just enduring. I was ready. I set my fork down slowly, the clink of metal against porcelain cutting through their laughter like a blade. My hand no longer trembled. My voice, when it finally came, was steady, low, and sharp enough to make the room fall quiet. I'm tired of this, I said, my eyes locked on Helena. I'm tired of being called worthless. You've all had your fun, but now you're going to hear the truth. The room stilled. Carter's grin faltered. Elise blinked at me as though she couldn't believe I'd spoken up. Even Helena leaned back slightly, her smirk uncertain. You want to talk about success? About who's actually done something for this family? I drew in a breath. Let's start with February 2 years ago. February 14th, to be exact. Mom, do you remember calling me at midnight? Crying? You begged me to cover the past due mortgage, so the bank wouldn't take this house. I wired $7,800 the next morning. The color drained from Helena's face just a shade, but I didn't stop. April 3rd, another $5,200. June 22nd, $3,600. July 9th, $4,100. I still have the receipts, every single one of them. Do you know how I paid it? By working double shifts. By taking freelance jobs on weekends. By dragging myself home so tired I could barely stand. Elise opened her mouth to interrupt, but I raised my hand. No, you're going to listen for once. August 28th, $2,900. October 12th, $6,000. December 4th, $4,750. I spent Christmas that year alone in my apartment because I was working overtime to pay those bills. Do you remember what you said to me, Mom, when I asked if I could skip the holiday dinner? You said, "Don't be dramatic. We'll be fine without you." You didn't even ask why I was too exhausted to show up. Carter shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but I went on, my voice rising just slightly with each number. March 14th of last year, $8,100. June 30th, $5,000. September 16th, $4,200. November 19th, $6,350. And finally, January 10th of this year, $4,000 to cover back taxes. Add it up, and the total comes to $62,000. The number landed like a weight in the room. No one laughed now. Carter's smirk was gone, Elise's mouth hung open, and Helena's face had gone pale. I leaned forward slightly, my tone calm but laced with iron. 62,000. That's more than Carter's ever earned in his so-called businesses. More than Elise has ever made in her entire life. Every single one of you has been living under this roof, enjoying the meals, the heat, the lights, because of me. Because of the work you mock, the job you call boring. I turned my gaze back to Helena, and she flinched. So if I'm a failure, then this entire house is built on failure. Every brick, every wall, every bite of food on this table exists because of the person you call worthless. For the first time in my life, silence reigned in that house. Carter didn't have a joke. Elise didn't have a giggle. And Helena's face drained of color until she looked as though she might faint. I sat back, folding my hands in my lap, my heartbeat steady now. For once, they were the ones speechless. The silence around the table was thick, but Carter was the first to break it. He leaned back in his chair, let out a sharp laugh, and waved his hand like I'd just told a wild story. Come on, Remy, he scoffed. You sound insane. 62 grand? You? Please. You're just being dramatic because you're jealous. Nobody here buys that fairy tale. He chuckled again, but it was nervous, thinner than before. Elise folded her arms, her glossy nails tapping against her skin. Honestly, this is embarrassing, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. You've always wanted attention, Remy. You hate that Mom is proud of us, so now you're inventing this little, I saved the family story to make yourself look important. She gave a laugh, though it sounded forced, and shook her head as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. I didn't flinch. I reached down into my bag and laid a thick folder on the table. Slowly, deliberately, I opened it and slid the papers across the polished wood. Bank statements. Cleared checks. Copies of wire transfers. Each one stamped, dated, undeniable. Carter leaned forward, his smirk slipping as his eyes scanned the pages. Elise's laughter stopped, her lips pressed into a thin line. Helena stayed very still, her hands trembling in her lap. Then, with a choked sound, she whispered, She's telling the truth. Carter's head snapped toward her. What? Helena's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. It's true. She's been the one keeping this house afloat. I asked her for help when the bank was ready to take everything. I couldn't let you two know. I didn't want you to think less of me. The words broke something in the room. Carter shoved his chair back, his voice rising. So you mean to tell me you've been funneling all that money through Remy? All this time, and you made us believe you were scraping by on your own? You gave her the chance to play savior behind our backs. Elise's eyes narrowed at Helena, her tone sharp and accusing. Unbelievable. You always said Carter was the favorite, but clearly it's Remy. All those secret talks, all that trust, you sided with her while the rest of us were left in the dark. Helena's sobs grew louder. No, you don't understand. But they weren't listening. Carter's face was red, his jaw tight. He jabbed a finger toward me. This is ridiculous. She's not some hero. She's been holding this over our heads, waiting for the perfect moment to humiliate us. Elise chimed in, her voice high and bitter. Exactly. She thinks she's better than us. And you let her. You made her your little secret partner, while we were treated like fools. I sat quietly, watching the cracks split wide open. Years of favoritism, the pedestal Carter had stood on, the constant praise lavished on Elise. It all turned to dust in minutes. Their rage wasn't at me. It was at Helena. For once, she had no defense, no scolding words to silence me, no excuses to protect them. The arguments overlapped, voices rising, fingers pointing, the family tearing itself apart right there at the dinner table. Carter shouted about betrayal, Elise hissed about lies, and Helena sobbed into her hands, repeating, I didn't mean for it to be this way. I leaned back in my chair, strangely calm. After years of being the quiet one, the overlooked one, I didn't have to lift another finger. The truth had done what I never could. It fractured the family in an instant. Decades of favoritism, undone with a stack of receipts. The shouting between Carter and Elise grew louder, their voices crashing into each other like waves in a storm. Helena sat at the head of the table, her face blotchy with tears, trying and failing to calm them down. For once, no one was looking at me, and I realized I finally had the power to end this in my own way. I pushed my chair back slightly and spoke, my tone even almost quiet. You can stop fighting. Because I'm done. The words sliced through the noise. Carter froze mid-sentence. Elise's lips parted in shock. Helena's wet eyes lifted toward me. I'm done paying, I continued, folding my hands in my lap. No more checks. No more late-night transfers. No more overtime shifts to clean up messes I didn't make. For 2 years, I've carried all of you on my back. And now I'm finished. Carter leaned forward, his face twisting. You can't just stop. The bank will come down on Mom again. The bills. I cut him off with a small shrug. Then deal with them. You're the businessman, right? Figure it out. The smirk he always wore was gone, replaced with the first flicker of fear I'd ever seen in his eyes. Elise scoffed, but her voice shook. You're bluffing. You wouldn't just walk away. You need us as much as we need you. That was when I allowed myself a small smile. Actually, I don't. I already put a down payment on a condo. Closed the deal last month. It's mine. My name only. I move in 2 weeks. The silence that followed was deafening. Helena's jaw fell open, and her fork clattered against her plate. Carter looked stunned, like he'd been punched. Elise stared at me, blinking rapidly, as though she couldn't process the idea that I had built something on my own. Helena finally found her voice, a thin, desperate whisper. Remy, you wouldn't leave us like this. Not after everything. We're family. I turned my gaze to her, calm, steady. Family? You mean the family that laughed while you called me a failure? The family that dismissed every sacrifice I made? No, Mom. What you mean is you don't want to lose your safety net. And that's what I've been to you. A safety net. Nothing more. Her hands trembled as she reached toward me. I never wanted you to feel that way. I leaned back, cutting her off. You only wanted what I could give. But I won't be manipulated anymore. I won't be guilt into carrying everyone else's responsibilities while you pretend I'm worthless. That ends tonight. Carter slammed his hand on the table, panic seeping into his voice. You can't just walk away. Without you, this whole place will collapse. Don't you care what happens to Mom? For the first time, I looked at him without fear, without hesitation. I cared. More than either of you ever did. But I'm not going to destroy my life just to keep pretending everything is fine in this house. If you're drowning, it's because you never learned how to swim. Don't blame me for walking out of the water. Helena broke then. Her face crumpled, and she whispered through her sobs, Please, Remy. Don't abandon family. We need you. I need you. I stood slowly, sliding my chair back with care, and met her desperate eyes. No, Mom. You don't need me. You need someone you can control. And that's not me anymore. Her tears kept falling, Carter's panic grew sharper. Elise sat in stunned silence. And me? For the first time in years, I felt free. I rose slowly from my chair, the legs scraping against the floor with a sound that cut through the thick air of the dining room. My heart wasn't racing anymore. My hands weren't shaking. I felt strangely calm, like I'd been waiting for this exact moment my entire life. I pushed my chair back into its place, neat and deliberate, as though I wanted to leave the table exactly the way I'd found it. Then I looked straight at Helena. She was still crying, still trying to pull herself together, but her eyes locked on mine when she realized I wasn't sitting down again. My voice was steady, quiet but strong enough to make every word land. I didn't abandon this family, I told her, holding her gaze. You abandoned me the moment you called me a failure. The room went silent. Carter's mouth opened like he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. Elise fidgeted in her chair, her painted nails clinking against her water glass. Helena froze, her breath catching as though my words had sliced right through her. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need one. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the dining room, my footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. I passed through the hallway, past the pictures of smiling faces on the walls, smiles that had never included me. I opened the front door and stepped into the cool night air, letting it wash over me like freedom. Behind me, the house erupted. The moment the door clicked shut, Carter's voice rose, sharp and angry. This is your fault, Elise. You've been riding on her back just as much as anyone else. All those clothes, all that makeup. Who do you think kept the lights on while you played influencer? Elise shot back instantly, her words like daggers. Don't you dare blame me. You're the one who sucked Mom dry with your fake businesses and your credit card scams. You're the reason she needed Remy's money in the first place. Are you kidding me? Carter roared. At least I try to build something. You just sit around taking selfies and waiting for someone to hand you a free life. Their voices clashed, growing louder and uglier with each accusation. Dishes clattered as someone slammed the table. Helena's sobs rose above it all, her pleas for them to stop going unheard. For the first time, I wasn't there to be the buffer. I wasn't there to swallow my pride and keep the peace. The walls of that house, The same walls I'd kept standing with my own sacrifice were now filled with the sound of the family tearing itself apart. I walked down the driveway with steady steps, the night quiet compared to the chaos I'd left behind. For years, Helena had believed she could control me with guilt, that I would always bend, always return, always carry the weight. But she was wrong, because walking away wasn't weakness, it was strength. And as the voices of Carter and Elise's argument faded into the distance, I felt lighter than I had in years. Weeks slipped by like pages turning in a book I no longer belonged to. I hadn't spoken to my family since the night I walked out. The silence was a gift I didn't know I'd been craving, and I guarded it carefully. Then one Sunday afternoon, my cousin Melissa called. She never got involved in family drama, so her voice on the line immediately caught my attention. "Remy," she said softly, "I thought you should know what's going on." I leaned back on my couch, the city skyline stretching out from my window. "Go on," I replied, bracing myself. Melissa hesitated before spilling everything. The house was hanging by a thread again, mortgage payments missed, the bank threatening foreclosure. Carter had finally hit rock bottom. Debt collectors were circling, his flashy watch pawned off for a fraction of what he paid. The so-called businesses he bragged about had collapsed completely, and now his phone barely stopped buzzing with threats of lawsuits and overdue notices. And Elise, sweet, pampered Elise, was no longer lounging on shopping sprees or posing for staged photos. She had been forced into something she'd sworn she would never do, work. Melissa said she'd picked up shifts at a department store, folding clothes and running registers, her nails chipped and her smile plastered on for strangers. The humiliation, apparently, was eating her alive. I sat there listening, not saying a word, but inside I felt something shift. It wasn't joy exactly, but a sense of justice. For once, reality had caught up with them. Then Melissa's tone softened further. "And your mom, she's been trying to reach you. Every day, from what I hear." That evening, I checked my phone. Sure enough, there were voicemails stacked one after the other, each more desperate than the last. The first one was shaky. "Remy, it's Mom. I know I've said things I shouldn't have. Please call me back. We need to talk." The second was more frantic. "I don't know what to do. Your brother's drowning, your sister's miserable, and I can't handle this alone. Please, Remy. I was wrong. I shouldn't have called you a failure. You're the only one who ever held this family together." I let the words play out in the quiet of my new home. My chest tightened, not out of longing but out of recognition. For years, I had lived for her approval, waiting for her to finally see me. Now the words I had once ached to hear sounded hollow, like a door being knocked on after the house had already burned down. I hovered my thumb over the delete button, listening to one last message. Helena's voice cracked as she whispered, "I can't lose you too." But she already had. With a slow exhale, I pressed delete. One by one, the messages disappeared until my phone was clear again, like wiping dust off a window. I set the phone down, walked into the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of wine. The red liquid caught the warm glow of the lamp, shimmering as I lifted it. I carried it to the balcony of my condo, stepping out into the evening air. Below, the city hummed with life, but up here it was peaceful. No accusations, no comparisons, no weight on my shoulders. Just me, my space, and the quiet I had earned. I sipped slowly, letting the calm sink in. For the first time in years, peace wasn't something I had to chase. It was mine to keep. I sat at my desk one quiet evening, a blank sheet of paper in front of me. The city outside my condo window glowed in the distance, cars drifting like fireflies down the streets. For weeks, Helena's voicemails had filled my phone, and though I had deleted every single one, I knew I needed to close the door properly. Not for her, this was for me. The pen felt heavy in my hand as I began to write. My words didn't come from anger anymore. That stage had passed the night I walked out. What flowed onto the page now was clarity, the kind that comes only after years of carrying someone else's burdens and finally setting them down. I began gently, almost kindly. "Mom, I want you to know something. Everything I did out of love. I worked those double shifts, I drained my savings, and I went without, because despite how you treated me, I still wanted to protect this family. I wanted to protect you." I paused, letting the truth sink in for myself as much as for her. I had sacrificed because it was who I was, not because they deserved it. And that difference mattered. "But love doesn't mean allowing cruelty," I continued. "Every cutting word, every comparison, every time you looked at me and decided I wasn't enough, it left scars I'll never forget. I begged for recognition, not money, not gifts, just to be seen. And when you called me a failure in front of everyone, you made sure I knew exactly where I stood in your eyes. The memory burned, but it no longer broke me. I leaned back, twirling the pen, then wrote the words I had carried inside me all along, the ones that finally gave me peace. You called me a failure, but failure is the roof over your head. Failure is the food on your table. And failure has finally moved on. I set the pen down, reading the letter one last time. It wasn't cruel, though it carried sharp edges. It wasn't vengeful, though it would sting. It was simply the truth, stripped bare of all the guilt I had once let them bury me under. Folding the paper carefully, I slipped it into an envelope, sealed it, and wrote her name across the front in steady handwriting. As I placed it in the outgoing mail, I felt no hesitation. Whatever Helena felt when she read it, anger, shame, regret, that was hers to carry, not mine. Back inside, I poured myself a glass of water and walked to the wide window of my condo. The city stretched before me, buzzing with life, lights blinking against the night sky. For years, I had looked at this view only in passing from buses or borrowed cars, wondering when it would ever be mine. And now, here I was standing in my own home, no longer tethered to a family that had taken and taken without ever giving back. I pressed my palm lightly against the glass, letting the cool surface ground me. This wasn't just freedom, it was a rebirth. I had walked away, I had let go, and now I had finally spoken my truth without fear. For the first time in my life, I wasn't Helena's daughter living in her shadow. I was Remy, independent, whole, free, and I would never look back. Do you believe Remy made the right choice by leaving her family behind for good, or should she have given them another chance? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd really like to hear your take. And if stories like this speak to you, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next one.